In 1950, Britain is the second largest car manufacturer on the planet. Its factories are shipping vehicles across the globe, to Australia, to Canada, to South Africa, and to America itself, commanding premium prices and genuine admiration wherever they land. The Mini sells over 5 million units across its lifetime. Princess Margaret owns one. The Beatles own one. Enzo Ferrari, the man who builds some of the greatest cars in the world, calls it his favourite car. And the Jaguar E-Type? Legend says Ferrari called it the most beautiful car ever made. But fast forward to 1975, and the industry that built those cars is gone. British Leyland, the company that was supposed to be the pride of a nation, is bankrupt and nationalised at a cost of £1,400,000,000 to the British taxpayer. In the showrooms where British cars once dominated, German and Japanese models have taken everything. Total humiliation. Now, the question of who really killed the British car industry has been widely debated, and there is a simple villain in this story. His name is Tony Benn, the Minister of Technology at the time. But the truth is more complicated, and there are two other men with blood on their hands. Either way, what follows will become the most catastrophic industrial collapse in British history. To understand how completely Britain destroys what it builds, you first need to understand just how extraordinary what it builds actually is. The year is 1950. Britain has survived the war battered but unbowed, and the nation is hungry for goods, hungry for progress, hungry for proof that the hardship was worth it. And it is producing over 500,000 vehicles a year, not just to satisfy that hunger at home, but to feed a world market hungry for what Britain makes. The genius behind those numbers is real, and it has names and faces. In 1959, a short, quietly brilliant engineer named Alec Issigonis, a Greek-born immigrant with a pencil constantly tucked behind his ear and a deep institutional contempt for committees, designs the car that will become the most influential vehicle in automotive history. He calls it the Mini. Its engineering is anything but simple. Issigonis places the engine sideways, transversely in the language of engineers, drives the front wheels rather than the rear, and somehow packs 4 adults into a footprint barely 10 feet long. No one has done this at volume before. No one believed it could be done at a price ordinary people could afford. Issigonis does it anyway, and the automotive world reorganizes itself around what he proves is possible. Issigonis is not alone. At Jaguar, a self-taught stylist and businessman named William Lyons, who left school as a teenager, took an apprenticeship at Crossley Motors in Manchester and built the Swallow Sidecar Company into one of Britain's most admired car manufacturers before he was 30, is building the E-Type from the ground up. Its body is designed using the same aerodynamic principles as Jaguar's Le Mans racing cars. Its 6-cylinder engine produces 265 horsepower. Its top speed is 150 miles per hour. It is priced, remarkably, at under £2,000 before tax. At Rover, engineers are developing the vehicle that will eventually become the Range Rover, defining a luxury off-road category that does not yet exist. At Triumph, at MG, at Austin Healey, sports cars are rolling out of Midlands factories and onto American roads, onto film sets, into the garages of the famous and the aspirational. Britain is not stumbling into automotive excellence. It is engineering it, deliberately and brilliantly, from a cluster of red brick factories in the grey heart of England. And here is something I find genuinely striking about this story. The Britain that is about to destroy its car industry is not a Britain in decline. It is a Britain at the top. But beneath the gleaming bonnet of this golden age, the ROT is already spreading, and it has been spreading for a very long time. Britain's car industry in the 1950s looks like an absolute juggernaut from the outside. From the inside, it is a collection of aging, underfunded, often bitterly competing fiefdoms, operating in the same country but speaking entirely different languages. The problem stems from decades of bitter tribalism, culminating in a post-war wave of mergers that created 2 large, disjointed groups. In 1952, arch-rivals Austin and Morris were shoved together to form the British Motor Corporation. Each factory operates like a separate nation-state. The engineers at Austin despise the engineers at Morris. Even though Austin and Morris are technically the same company, managers hoard their budgets, refuse to share technology, and would rather see a new model fail than admit their rival's engineering is superior. Meanwhile, in Germany, a company called Volkswagen is quietly rebuilding itself from the rubble of total war. The Beetle is not a magnificent piece of engineering, but it is relentlessly, obsessively reliable. It starts every morning. It does not rust in 3 years. In Japan, Toyota is doing something similar, applying an engineering philosophy called Kaizen, continuous improvement, after a disastrous first attempt to sell cars in America in 1957. Methodically, patiently, without drama, Britain's industry watches none of this. Complacency is not strong enough a word. It is contempt. The idea that German workers, still clearing bombed rubble from their cities, or Japanese factory hands, could threaten the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution is simply not taken seriously. But the world is undergoing a profound and permanent change, and no one will pay the price for that failure to notice more catastrophically than the men who come next. The year is 1968. Britain is in political and economic turmoil. The pound has been devalued. Unemployment is rising. And in the Department of Technology, a brilliant, combustible, idealistic minister named Anthony Neil Wedgwood Benn, Tony Benn, is staring at a problem that fills him with something between dread and opportunity. The British car industry is fragmenting. Britain's share of world car exports is falling year on year. The Americans at Ford and General Motors are pouring billions into their European operations. British Leyland and BMC are profitable, but barely, and separately, neither is large enough to fund the research, the tooling, the automation that the next decade will demand. Tony Benn believes, with the absolute conviction of a man who has never doubted the righteousness of his own vision, that the solution is scale. A national champion, a single colossal British automotive corporation that can match the Americans and Germans in research spending, in manufacturing investment, in global reach. He is not entirely wrong. The logic of scale is real. When you can spread the cost of a new engine across 4 million cars instead of 400,000, everything changes. He has done the arithmetic. What Ben cannot see, or will not see, is the human arithmetic. You cannot legislate away the fact that the engineers at Jaguar consider themselves artists, and the engineers at Austin consider themselves craftsmen, and neither group considers the other worthy of sharing a boardroom. On January 17, 1968, the British Leyland Motor Corporation is born. It is the largest industrial merger in British history. Overnight, a single company comes to control more than 40 manufacturing plants, nearly 180,000 workers, and dozens of vehicle brands spanning passenger cars, trucks, and buses. Harold Wilson calls it a triumph of industrial policy. The newspapers call it Britain's answer to General Motors. But what no one in Whitehall has planned for, what the civil servants did not model, and the economists did not forecast, is what happens on the factory floor the morning after. If you are finding this story as remarkable as I am, hit subscribe. There is a lot more British industrial history on this channel that I think you will want to see. The workers at Longbridge did not ask to be merged with the workers at Coventry. The shop stewards at Morris did not vote to share their pay structures with the shop stewards at Austin. The managers at Triumph did not agree to surrender their engineering budgets to a central committee in Birmingham they do not trust and have never met. British Leyland is not a company, it is a forced marriage of enemies. The Longbridge plant, the vast sprawling Birmingham factory that is British Leyland's beating heart, employing nearly 50,000 workers at its peak, is already troubled in 1968. The factory is old. Some of its machinery dates to the 1930s. The assembly lines are badly configured, with components arriving late, wrong, or not at all. But the machinery is not the real problem. The real problem sits at the intersection of two forces that British Leyland's architects have catastrophically failed to account for: a management culture of arrogance and denial, and a union structure of breathtaking, weaponized complexity. And at the center of both, shaping both, exploiting both, is a man who will become the most consequential shop steward in British industrial history. Derek Robinson is not a monster. This is important to understand because it is easy, 40 years later, to make him one. He was born in Birmingham in 1927, the son of a factory worker. He leaves school at 14. He takes work on the Longbridge line in his teens, and he reads voraciously Marx, Engels, the history of the labour movement, and what he reads fills him with an anger that never fully cools. He is intelligent, articulate, and possessed of a charisma that makes him magnetic on the factory floor. When he speaks, men stop working to listen. By the late 1960s, Robinson is the convener, the senior shop steward, of the Amalgamated Union of Engineering Workers at Longbridge. He holds the most powerful union position at the most important car factory in Britain. And in British Leyland, newly merged, chaotically managed, and attempting to impose new pay structures on 150,000 suspicious, resentful workers, he finds the perfect conditions for everything he believes. Robinson does not see himself as a saboteur. He sees himself as a defender, and in many ways, in the early years, he is right. The management of British Leyland in its first years is genuinely, spectacularly incompetent. The first chairman of British Leyland is Lord Donald Stokes. He is a salesman by background and temperament, charming, confident, deeply comfortable in boardrooms and at diplomatic dinners. Harold Wilson considers him the ideal figure to lead Britain's new automotive giant. But Stokes is not an engineer. He does not understand production. He does not understand that at Longbridge, Coventry and Oxford, workers are watching the chaos of the new merged company unfold and drawing a simple, rational conclusion. This management does not know what it is doing, and we must protect ourselves. The pay structures within British Leyland are a labyrinth. Because the merger has happened so quickly, different plants have different pay rates for identical work. A worker assembling engines in Coventry can earn 40% more than a worker doing the same job in Birmingham. This is not a theoretical injustice. It is a daily, visible, infuriating reality. And when management cannot explain it, cannot fix it, and cannot offer a credible plan, Derek Robinson can. He can explain it in the language of class, of exploitation, of capital against labour. And crucially, he has a weapon that most union leaders can only dream of, the structure of British Leyland's manufacturing process. Because the factories are deeply, vulnerably interdependent, a strike at any single point in the supply chain can halt production across the entire company. A walkout by 40 toolmakers, not 40,000 but 40, can stop the production lines at Longbridge entirely. Between 1969 and 1979, Derek Robinson leads or endorses over 500 unofficial strikes at Longbridge. The number is staggering. In some years, Longbridge loses more working days to industrial action than any other factory in Britain. The wildcat strikes, sudden, unannounced, often triggered by disputes over pennies per hour, become the default tool of a workforce that has learned that disruption is the only language management understands. But what Robinson doesn't realise, what neither he nor management fully grasps, is that every strike, every lost day, every car that fails to leave the factory is simultaneously being catalogued by the men who will eventually render the entire debate catalogued. In Toyota City, a purpose-built municipality in Aichi Prefecture, Japan, the engineers are watching the British situation with quiet, professional attention. By 1972, Toyota's cars start reliably. They do not rust after 3 winters. They are not exciting. They do not stir the soul the way a Jaguar E-Type stirs the soul. But they arrive on time, work every day they are required to work, and do not cost a fortune to repair. The Toyota Corolla, launched in 1966, becomes the best-selling car in the world by 1974, not by being brilliant, but by being dependable, affordable, and always available. Because its factories are not on strike. In Wolfsburg, the Volkswagen Golf arrives in 1974, front-wheel drive, water-cooled, competently built, priced for the European middle class. Within 2 years, it is selling more than 300,000 units annually. British Leyland is fighting a civil war, and while it fights that civil war, its customers are quietly, without drama or announcement, walking into the showrooms of its enemies. In 1971, British Leyland launches the Morris Marina. It is intended to compete directly with the Ford Cortina, the best-selling car in Britain, reliable and utterly inoffensive, selling in enormous numbers because it does what it is supposed to do every time without complaint. The Marina is none of those things. Its suspension is derived from the 1948 Morris Minor. Its rust protection is so poor that owners in wetter parts of Britain begin to lose structural integrity within 2 years. Cars leave Longbridge with doors that don't close properly, heaters that pump exhaust fumes into the cabin, and electrical systems that fail in rain. The quality control process is supposed to catch these problems. It does not. And then, in 1973, British Leyland launches the Austin Allegro, and something shifts. Not just in the market, but in the national consciousness. The Allegro's most infamous feature is its steering wheel. In an attempt to improve driver visibility of the instrument panel, it is fitted with a square steering wheel, a shape that automotive engineers had avoided for obvious ergonomic reasons since the dawn of the automobile. It is called the quartic wheel, and it becomes a national joke overnight. But the quartic wheel is merely the most visible symbol of a deeper problem. The Allegro is so lightly engineered that a misplaced trolley jack can flex the body shell enough to pop the rear window clean out of its frame. Its front wheel bearings are incompatible with older BMC tooling, meaning mechanics who over-tighten them cause the bearings to fail, occasionally with the wheel detaching while the car is moving. These are not isolated faults. They are the inevitable result of building a car on a compromised budget in a factory at war with itself. Now, what I find genuinely shocking about this, and I didn't fully appreciate it until I went deep into the records, is that the Allegro is not some fringe model. It is the flagship family car of the largest manufacturing company in Britain, and it is producing a car that becomes the national symbol of industrial failure. Drop a comment if you knew someone who owned one. I'd genuinely like to know how bad it actually was to live with. In December of 1974, the chief executive of British Leyland submits a confidential report to the Labour government. Its contents are devastating. British Leyland is effectively bankrupt. Its factories are producing cars that nobody wants to buy at prices that don't cover their cost of manufacture. Its industrial relations are in a state of permanent crisis. Without immediate, massive government intervention, British Leyland will collapse within 18 months, destroying 150,000 direct jobs and perhaps 500,000 more in the supply chain. In April 1975, British Leyland is nationalised. The British taxpayer becomes the owner of the most dysfunctional car company in the Western world. The cost of the bailout is £1,400,000,000. Lord Stokes departs. He has been chairman since the merger. His tenure has been marked by charm, confidence, and a comprehensive failure to address any of the structural problems that were obvious from day one. The cars continue to be built, they continue to be unreliable, and the Japanese and German manufacturers continue to take market share, month by month, with the patience and consistency of a tide coming in. But British Leyland's troubles are just beginning. In 1977, the government makes a desperate and surprising appointment. The new chief executive of British Leyland is Sir Michael Edwards. He is 47 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, South African by birth, and possessed of a will that people who work with him describe, consistently and independently, as iron. He does not do charm. He does not do patience. He arrives with a single, ruthless, clear-eyed mission: cut the rot or the company dies. Edwards' conclusion is blunt. British Leyland is not one crisis. It is 3 simultaneous crises, feeding each other in a loop that no previous management has had the courage to break. These are product quality, management capability, and industrial relations. Until all three are addressed simultaneously, not sequentially, not gently, the company will continue to bleed. He prioritizes the Metro, a successor to the Mini, designed to compete with the new generation of European superminis. The Rover SD1, a genuinely beautiful and technically ambitious executive car that has already won the European Car of the Year award in 1977, is to be properly supported for the first time. But Edwardes knows that better products cannot save British Leyland if the factories grind to a halt every 3 weeks, and the factories cannot be fixed while Derek Robinson controls the Longbridge workforce. The two men are adversaries, engaged in a struggle for the soul of a company, and behind that struggle, a struggle for the definition of what British industry should be in the 1980s. Edwardes makes a move that no British industrial manager has ever attempted at this scale. In late 1977, he prepares a detailed recovery plan and mails it individually to every single one of British Leyland's 150,000 workers at their home addresses, not to the union leadership, not to the shop stewards, to the workers themselves. For the first time in the history of British Leyland, workers are being spoken to directly, not through Robinson, not through union committees, not through the mediation of men who have an institutional interest in continuing conflict. Robinson is furious. He calls the move a deliberate attempt to undermine collective bargaining. He demands that workers reject the recovery plan, but something is shifting. The workers who have lived through the chaos of the previous decade, who have watched British Leyland's market share fall year after year, who have seen the cars they build mocked in newspapers, are beginning to wonder if Robinson's prescription is working. The vote on Edwards' recovery plan passes. Narrowly, but it passes. Robinson calls it a betrayal. Edwardes calls it a beginning. On November 19, 1979, Sir Michael Edwardes fires Derek Robinson. The stated reason is a pamphlet, a document Robinson has signed, calling on workers to reject the latest British Leyland recovery plan. Edwardes presents evidence, made public, that Robinson's strikes over the previous 20 months have cost British Leyland an estimated £200 million in lost production. The reaction is immediate and enormous. Robinson's supporters organise a mass meeting at Longbridge. 12,000 workers attend. There are calls for a general strike. Trade union leaders across Britain express solidarity. And then something remarkable happens. The workers vote. They vote on whether to strike in protest at Robinson's dismissal, and they vote, by a clear majority, not to strike. The man who has defined Longbridge for 15 years, who has led 500 strikes, who has made himself the voice and the embodiment of worker resistance at the most important factory in Britain, has been dismissed, and the workers he led have chosen not to fight for him. But the corner Edwards turns, when he turns it, does not reveal the open road he hoped for. It reveals a cliff. The early 1980s are a cruel decade for British manufacturing. Margaret Thatcher's government drives interest rates above 15%, and the pound to levels that make British exports catastrophically expensive in foreign markets. For an industry that depends on exports for its survival, this is an additional wound on top of wounds that have not yet healed. By 1982, Japanese manufacturers are no longer merely a threat. They are a fact. In Britain, Toyota, Datsun, soon rebranded as Nissan, and Honda are taking a combined market share of over 12%. In the United States, Japanese reliability has reset consumer expectations. American buyers who once accepted a car that needed workshop attention every 10,000 miles now expect a car that runs for 100,000 miles without serious mechanical failure. British Leyland's cars cannot consistently meet that expectation. Edwardes signs a technical partnership with Honda in 1979. The arrangement eventually produces the Triumph Acclaim, the first truly reliable mass-market car to come from the Longbridge stable in over a decade. The Acclaim is, in fact, largely a rebadged Honda Ballad. It is not a British car in any meaningful engineering sense, but it works. It does not rust in 2 years. Its electrics function in rain. That it takes a partnership with the Japanese to produce a car that simply works is, in itself, a verdict on everything that has happened since 1968. By 1986, Edwards has departed. British Leyland has been reorganised, rebranded, and broken into pieces. Jaguar is floated and sold. Land Rover is ring-fenced. What remains of the car-making operation is renamed the Rover Group, and the government begins the long, ultimately unsuccessful process of trying to find a buyer. The Rover Group produces some genuinely good cars. The Rover 800 series, developed in partnership with Honda, is well regarded, but the volume business never catches fire. A decade and a half of unreliable cars, of strike-interrupted deliveries, of parts shortages, and dealer frustration has poisoned the name British Leyland, and by association the names of everything it makes, in the minds of ordinary British buyers. These are not irrational consumers. They are rational people making rational decisions. Japanese cars and German cars are more reliable than British cars. The data supports them. The reputation is deserved. And reputation, once lost, is almost impossible to recover. Before the final act of this story is told, it is worth pausing to ask the question that has driven every page of this narrative. Who killed the British car industry? The simplest answer is Tony Benn. It was Benn who forced the merger. Benn who created the monster. Benn who, with the best of intentions and the worst of judgment, forced 100 years of corporate rivalry and institutional suspicion under one roof, and declared the problem solved. And there is truth in that answer. The British Leyland merger is a catastrophic act of industrial policy. It creates a company too large to manage, too internally divided to function, and too politically important to be allowed to fail at the speed at which failure would have been instructive. If the individual companies had been allowed to compete, and fail, and be absorbed by foreign capital in the late 1960s, as some of them might well have been, some might have survived under new management with new investment and new direction. Instead, they are locked into a structure that amplifies their weaknesses and suppresses their strengths. But to blame Benn alone is to let two other men escape the verdict they deserve. The second killer is Lord Stokes, not because he is uniquely wicked or incompetent, but because he represents a management culture that is endemic, not exceptional. The culture that says size equals invincibility. The culture that reads last year's market share reports and concludes that today is safe. The culture that promotes from within, rewards loyalty over ability, and treats the factory floor as a place where problems happen rather than where quality is either built or destroyed. Stokes has 9 years to address the structural problems of British Leyland. He addresses almost none of them. Under his watch, product quality deteriorates, industrial relations deteriorate, and the gap between British Leyland and its international competitors widens every year. And the third killer is the ideology of industrial conflict. Derek Robinson is a man who genuinely believes that the interests of capital and the interests of labour are irretrievably opposed, and that any concession to management is a betrayal of workers. He is not entirely wrong about British Leyland asset management. It is, in many periods, arrogant, incompetent, and dishonest about its plans for the workforce. But Robinson S.'s prescription, strike, strike and strike again, disrupt, resist, and never concede, is a prescription that eats the patient while it claims to cure the disease. Every strike at Longbridge tells another potential buyer to walk into a Toyota showroom instead. Every car built badly because the workforce is demoralised and the management is defensive is another nail in the coffin of the company Cobb Bibinson claims to be defending. It is a toxic trinity. Three forces operating simultaneously, reinforcing each other's worst tendencies, creating a feedback loop of failure that no single person and no single decision could have broken. And behind all three of them, the patient executioners, Volkswagen, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, building reliable, affordable cars in well-run factories with motivated workers and competent management, and waiting for Britain to finish destroying itself. In 2000, BMW, the German luxury car maker that had purchased the Rover Group from the British government in 1994 for £800 million, announces that it is giving up. 6 years of ownership, more than €3 billion of investment, and the Rover car business is still not making money. BMW sells Land Rover to Ford, retains the rights to the Mini name, and hands what is left, the Rover car brand, the Longbridge factory, and around 9,000 workers, to a management buyout team for £10. Not 10 million. £10. The new company is called MG Rover Group, led by a quartet of businessmen known, eventually, and not affectionately, as the Phoenix Four. They pay themselves extremely well, and the car business continues to decline. In April 2005, MG Rover Group enters administration. The Longbridge plant, which once employed 50,000 workers and had been building cars in Birmingham for over 100 years, closes its gates. 6,000 people lose their jobs in a single day. A parliamentary inquiry later finds that the Phoenix Four paid themselves approximately £42 million during their 5 years of ownership of a company, losing money every year of their tenure. The Longbridge site is eventually demolished and redeveloped. A new residential district rises on the land where Britain-esque cars were built and broken. Street names in the new development reference the history of the site, Isagonis Way, for the designer of the Mini. The cars that were built there are mostly gone too, dissolved by the rust that their builders never quite figured out how to prevent. And yet, on a summer Sunday, on a country road in Warwickshire or Dorset or the North Yorkshire moors, you will still find them. The survivors, the ones that were loved well enough, or lucky enough, or simply stubborn enough to endure. These cars are fiercely loved. They are restored at extraordinary expense by people who were not alive when they were built. They are maintained at clubs and rallies and specialist garages by mechanics who possess skills that the factories that built the originals could never consistently deploy. They have outlasted the companies that made them, the politicians who tried to save those companies, and the union battles that helped destroy them. What remains is the memory, the clatter of a pushrod engine warming up on a cold morning, the smell of petrol and leather, and something indefinably British. The knowledge, held privately, fiercely, a little painfully, that there was something here once, something that could have been saved, something that we made with our hands and our minds and our stubbornness, in 1,000 factories in 100 towns, in the grey, wet heart of England. Beautiful, tragic, gone. The polished ghosts of a ghost industry rolling through a country that no longer knows how to build them, loved by people who can no longer imagine what it would mean if it did. If you want to see another one exactly like it, about how one man handed the keys to Britain's greatest motorcycle brands to someone who had already decided they were not worth saving, then this next video is made for you.